What can I say? Today is not gonna suck. We have the all-new AMG GT63 from Mercedes-Benz and one of its main rivals, the BMW M8 Competition. And this being Edmunds, we're here at our test track, so we're gonna give you the testing numbers for everything from acceleration to braking and handling. And then of course, we're gonna take them around the track to show you guys how they drive. After that, we'll check out these interiors because these are both vehicles with touring aspirations and giant price tags. And then we'll let you know which one of these is the king of the German coupes. I'm going to have a very, very good day. For right now, this is the top dog of the AMG GT lineup. More powerful versions are coming, but this AMG GT63 makes 577 horsepower and 590 pounds-feet of torque. And one of the big changes for this new generation of AMG GT is the addition of all-wheel drive, which also brings with it a lot more weight. This vehicle tipped the scales at 4,296 pounds at our test track, and that's over 600 pounds more than the last generation AMG GTR, which also featured the same engine.
3, 2, 1.
All-wheel drive seems to have dramatically improved the AMG GT's ability to get off the line, completing the sprint in just 3.1 seconds. It continued to stampede all the way through the quarter mile, covering that distance in 11.1 seconds and trapping at 122.5 miles per hour. Stopping power is also quite good, as the AMG GT stops from 60 miles an hour in just 102 feet. While the AMG GT is all new, the M8 Competition is on the older side, and it hasn't gotten big updates since it was introduced as a new model for the 2020 model year. But on paper, it's got some advantages here, like 40 more horsepower and about 80 fewer pounds than the Mercedes. Under the hood, the M8 Competition's twin-turbo 4.4-liter V8 pumps out 617 horsepower, and just like in the AMG GT, the M8's all-wheel drive system helps it to get off the line with violence. Its acceleration times fall just a tenth behind those of the Mercedes, with a 3.2-second 0 to 60 mile an hour time and an 11.2-second quarter mile at 125 miles an hour. Its braking distance was also slightly longer, taking 109 feet to come to a stop from 60 miles an hour. The Mercedes also held an advantage when it comes to lateral grip. This new car also comes with brand spanking new tires, a Michelin Pilot Sport 5S versus the Pirelli P0s on the M8. It pulled 1.08 lateral G on our skid pad, beating out the M8's 1.01 lateral G by a good margin. So by the numbers, the Mercedes has a small advantage when it comes to acceleration, and a much bigger one when it comes to grip. But numbers aren't everything, right? So let's hit the track. There we go. We are going to kick things off here in the new AMG GT, and as you saw from its testing numbers, this thing is capable of some very serious speed. 577 horsepower coming out of that bi-turbo 4-liter V8, and this thing in a straight line and out here on our track feels very, very quick indeed. This thing has a 9-speed automatic, one more speed than you get in the BMW. We won't use all those out here. This is kind of a second, third gear track, but you do have that at your disposal. Right now I'm driving around the automatic mode, and this thing is doing quite a good job of being in the right gear. Downshifts you pretty immediately when you get into the corners here. This is a second gear corner, didn't need to touch anything, and it's down there. So the shift logic is quite good, and little drift on the exit. The big change for the AMG GT in this generation is that it's gone now to all-wheel drive, and that matches the setup that we're finding in the M8. But I will say that for an all-wheel drive system, it really doesn't drive like one. It almost feels like rear-wheel drive as we're taking it here around our handling circuit. The rear end of this car loves to step out. It's actually a bit tail-happy, more so than many of the other all-wheel drive systems that we've tested out here. In that way, you are almost getting the best of both worlds. You have sort of the confidence and reassurance of all four wheels being driven underneath you. But at the same time, if you come around the corner, really tuck that front in like this, and you want to get a little loose on exit, you can. Turn in on this vehicle is quite sharp. This has a rear wheel steering system, so as you're really trying to get the nose of this vehicle down into these tighter turns here, it does a great job of bringing the rear of the car around with you. But I will say this though, especially in the Sport Plus and Race Drive settings, the steering feel is firm but not heavy, and it is really missing feedback. There's a bit of a disconnect here that I feel from the front of the car. I actually feel like the rear of the car is really communicative. Like, you know exactly when it's going to step out, and it's all very predictable what's going on behind me. But the nose of the car, even though it doesn't really understeer, I'm not really necessarily afraid that it's going to push. I just really wish that there was more feedback here, especially as we're getting close to the limit, to really let you know where the end of grip for those front tires is going to be. But then again, oh man, this thing has got some real serious speed to it. Another item for me on the wish list for our AMG GT is that I wish it came with the carbon ceramic brakes. The brakes here are pretty good initially, but after a few laps, they do start to fade out pretty quickly. The brake pedal feels actually pretty good when they're not getting overcooked, and the front of the car feels very stable under braking, which is nice. But if you're going to do any kind of track day duty or put some laps on one of these, carbon ceramic brakes are on the wish list. Impressive is the word that I keep coming back to when I think about the AMG GT. The way that it accelerates, the way that it brakes, the way that it steers, all those things are great, but there's something missing from the experience. It's clinical. It's very, very clinical and impressive and serious, but it's not quite as fun as I think that it should be. Like, you know, obviously I'm on a track driving this around, so there's a bit of inherent fun built into the experience, but there's something about it that's just very cold and calculated. It's got a fantastic engine, it's got tons of grip, it gets around our track in a hurry, but it's so serious all the time that it sort of takes a bit of the joy out of the experience for you. Now I've taken us a step back, we put the vehicle in comfort mode, and we're going to talk a second about what it's like to drive the AMG GT on the road. For a touring car, I kind of thought that the AMG GT's, you know, more toned down drive modes would offer a bit softer suspension, a bit more, you know, sort of laziness in the steering, just so it would be like an easier car to pilot over really long distance. But the suspension is still, I wouldn't say that it was stiff, but it still feels quite, like it's, you know, still making a fist. And so I think that over sort of a longer trip, that might get a bit fatiguing. I just wish that in some ways comfort mode was a bit more comfortable in this car. I will say this though, visibility is excellent. Now you might look at the AMG GT and see its sort of shape in this cockpit and think you won't be able to see anything out of it. The rear glass is gigantic. I feel like I can see everything around me in this vehicle without too much effort. So that I really do appreciate. Let it go. Oh my God. So the BMW M8, not new like the AMG GT. That doesn't really matter because this thing, oh, this thing is a monster. It might not have the sports car looks that the AMG GT does, but you get this thing out here and it just surprises you over and over and over again. Right now I'm driving in the M1 drive setting, which is customizable along the M2. So I have the, still in 4-wheel drive, just to give myself some extra grip and confidence out here. And I have the traction control set to the setting that's called MDM, where it is not completely off, but mostly off. It's still there to sort of catch you if anything bad happens, but I like kind of having, especially for these first few laps, that little bit of reassurance. There is a 2-wheel drive setting. If you really want to let the rear sort of hang out, it does turn it into a pretty tail-happy automobile, and this track is pretty tight, so there's not really a ton of room to play around with it here today. It's nice to have that sort of in the back pocket if you really want to have a rear-wheel drive feel, but I do really like this all-wheel drive system out here. There doesn't really have any of the problems that you sort of associate with an all-wheel drive system on the track. It doesn't really understeer. In fact, there's still a bit of a tendency towards oversteer, especially coming out of corners. But yeah, I think four-wheel drive is the way to go if you want to put down the best sort of times or feel the most agility and have the vehicle feel really stable, especially here, like when you're getting out of turns. Oh. This thing it's an absolute joy to drive on a track. I'm coming up to our first long straightaway here. Out of this hairpin, and we're gonna wheel down. Oh, little tail step out a little. Oh. This engine loves to rev super fast. Second gear is not that long, so when you're coming out of any sort of lower speed corner here, you really have to be ready to upshift into third basically immediately, like right there, right at around 60 miles an hour. When you have this thing in its crispest shift setting like this, shifts are instantaneous, and you can honestly drive it even in the non-manual mode, and it does a pretty good job of staying in the right gear. But if you really want to get everything you can out of it, you kind of got to grab the paddles yourself and do a little bit of work, but not a lot of work. The way that this car puts down power is absolutely intoxicating, and it sounds fantastic. The other thing you come to appreciate about it, especially with the suspension dialed up into its stiffest setting, is that when you do get on the gas, there isn't much rock back. The nose stays pretty planted down in the front, so you can actually get on a little bit earlier than you think and not have to worry about the car sort of bucking up and losing any front grip. And it has more grip than you would think, especially on these on-camber turns like this. That front feels so stable. Our test vehicle also comes with the optional carbon ceramic brake package, and these brakes they're really good too. This BMW M8 is just a fantastic all-rounder. It's good at everything out here. It is good at going, it is good at stopping, it is good at turning, and I think that's why it's had such a successful U-Drag's career, because that format is really designed to test all aspects of a car's performance. And whatever way you want to slice it, the BMW M8 is just really, really, really excellent all around. Here we go again on the straight. Oh. I absolutely love driving this thing fast. If I have one sort of nit to pick, it's not the lightest car in the world. There are points at which you do, especially turning in here on something like this hairpin, where on that initial sort of turn in where you really want that bite, you do feel the weight of the car a little bit and it gets a touch out over its front feet. But otherwise, as I think through all the different M cars that I've tested throughout the years, from the 2 all the way on up to the 8, I think this might be my favorite one of them all. I can't stop smiling. So now we've slowed things down to just briefly for a moment talk about what the M8 is like as a road car. So everything's been turned all the way back. Suspension's in comfort, steering's in comfort, brakes are in comfort. On the road with this thing, when it's sort of, it's defanged a bit, it's absolutely lovely. It's very, very quiet. The only sound that you'll really hear in the cabin is the sound from the engine. But otherwise, it is just an absolutely fantastic cruiser. It glides down the road. The suspension is really comfortable. BMW did a great job of sort of tuning the different suspension settings, where the stiff one is ultra stiff that you would want for the track, and then this comfort one here is just nice and easy breezy. The M8 is really 2 cars in one, because when you drive it like this, it is just completely comfortable, completely, you feel like you're behind the wheel of a real luxury car. And then if you do get on a circuit, you hit a few buttons and all of a sudden it is just back to snarling and tossing you around. What a fantastic car.
On the track, both coupes were better than you'd think given their size and weight, with surprising agility and a pair of V8s that are just awesome. But they feel very different from behind the wheel, representing opposite sides of the German spectrum. The AMG is cold and calculated. A member of our test team told me that the Mercedes feels like it wants to remind you all the time that it's a serious performance car, and it comes off feeling clinical and almost stoic in the way that it moves around the track. The BMW, however, it feels like Oktoberfest. It's a rolling party on wheels, and you feel a greater connection to the car and the track than you do in the AMG GT. And on top of that, the M8 Competition is also the superior touring car. It's much more comfortable in both the suspension and in the seats, and for a long trip, there's no question which car I'd be taking.
The AMG GT's interior definitely does deliver a luxury experience. Materials choices in here are pretty impeccable. As you can see, this vehicle has the carbon fiber package. So we've got carbon fiber here, on the doors, different places on the exterior. This comes with a vertically oriented touchscreen powered by Mercedes' latest multimedia system called MBUX, and I don't love it here still. Now, when the system first came out a few years ago, it felt very progressive, it felt very sort of forward, and now I think it's a bit convoluted. The nice thing is though that some of these controls down here stay, so you do have access to the climate controls at all time, even though that does sort of cut down on the screen real estate you have. But what is a bit confusing and strange to use about this system now is that nothing is really in a logical fashion, like the layout of it. So to get to different things, it's a bit of a learning curve. The thing that saves it is that the voice commands are actually pretty good. Hey Mercedes,
How can I help?
turn on the driver's ventilated seat.
I'm switching on the seat ventilation on the driver's seat.
But actually using the system and trying to find the settings that you want, it can take a while unless you know exactly where you're headed. The other thing I don't like is that one of the ways to control it is via the steering wheel actually. So there are these two bars here on the top of the steering wheel that have these capacitive controls, and the left-hand one here mostly works the instrument cluster, and this right-hand one works for the screen, and it's just really not an intuitive way to do this. I do really enjoy the size though and the feeling of the steering wheel. This is sort of finished in Alcantara, and when you're driving on the track, it feels great in the hand. Mercedes also puts a lot of their controls for how you change the vehicle's drive modes, exhaust settings, suspension settings, all that right here, and that's a really great place for them because they're always easy to find. I do really like the customizability of the instrument cluster. There's a lot of different views for track, sport, or just for normal use, and you can kind of set up the cluster exactly the way you want. The overall aesthetic of this interior I do really like, although I would say that perhaps white leather is not the best choice for seats because this test vehicle that we have, this driver's seat is sort of no longer white in places, and it's only been in operation for about 3,000 miles. So if you're gonna own one of these for a while, maybe you don't go for the white, or you're gonna have to keep the blue jeans tucked away in the closet. Another thing that's very nice about this, comes standard with the Burmester audio system, and that is much better than the system that the BMW has. I believe that's a Harman Kardon system. This one feels much better and more substantial than that one. This test vehicle comes with nearly $30,000 in options, and $700 worth of options for that is additional adjustments for these AMG seats. Now, one of the things that I've always found about AMG seats is that they're not the most comfortable. They're actually a bit more oriented for being on a track than for sort of day-to-day use. And I would say that's definitely true about these. They're plenty supportive, and you actually are able to adjust the side bolsters to hold you in more if you're at a track, and you're also able to adjust the lumbar via the screen weirdly, but you can do both of those things. I would say though that if you had to settle into these for a long trip, they are not the most comfortable things in the world. They're a bit pokey and they don't have a lot of give to them. They look very cool. They're kind of thin and really very futuristic looking, but on the comfort side, I'd say they're a little lacking. The place where the BMW really begins to show its age is here on the interior. That's not to say that it isn't nice. It is a BMW 8 Series after all, but it does feel more dated than the modern sort of opus that is the AMG GT's interior. I do like the placement of this screen here more in the BMW. It's a bit easier to see. You don't have to look down quite as far as to see it in the Mercedes, but this is actually running the older version of iDrive. There's a new version of it that's already in many of the BMWs that have come out since 2020, since this car was last redone. And there's a version of BMW's infotainment that's going to come later this year. So this is going to feel double dated by the time that that thing comes out. Now this system, it's not a bad one. It's fairly powerful, but it is a bit convoluted to use. Same thing, the menu structure isn't super intuitive, and to get to all the things you want is probably going to require 2, 3, even 4 button presses sometimes. Again, voice commands, quite good, and that's sort of the saving grace here, but it does feel a bit let's say behind is the word that I would use. Otherwise, things that I like about this interior, the seats actually. So I think that the seats in this vehicle are a lot more comfortable than the ones that you're going to get in the Mercedes. They're both quite supportive for track use, but also very comfortable for day-to-day use. As you can see, they have a bit cushion to them. And if I was going to have to sit in this seat for a few hours, I'd be more than happy doing so. On the Mercedes, I might, have to take a stop for a stretch every now and then. Now, you might look at the shapes of these two vehicles and think that the BMW has a big advantage when it comes to the rear seat. However, I would say that in both of these vehicles, kind of like the water you see in the pond at an amusement park, they're not really fit for human consumption. There's really no room to fit anything back here. There's no leg room and no headroom to speak of, even in the BMW. When I'm set up here in the BMW where I like to drive, you measure the amount of leg room between the back of the seat and the back seat by fingers, sort of like how I measure my whiskey. Now in the Mercedes, the back seat is a no-cost option, which means that you can very easily delete it, and our test vehicle didn't even come with a back seat equipped, so technically it's a two-seater, but functionally, they're really just cars meant for two people at a time. Thankfully, they also both have rather large trunks. You can fit some bags back there, making them good for a road trip, as long as it's a road trip for two. Overall, I have to give the edge on interior refinement to the Mercedes. I do think it looks more modern. I also like that in that vehicle, all the touch points that you're going to be dealing with, they feel better. For example, the air vents in the Mercedes, they're all metal. Here, you have plastic sort of controls here that feel a bit flimsy, and a lot of plastic here, especially along the dash. Overall, the Mercedes is gonna feel nicer, it looks nicer, and even though the placement of the screen is not quite as good, it is a bit more powerful than this older version of the BMW multimedia system. So after a full day here at the Edmunds test track with both of these German coupes, it might seem that we have a really close battle on our hands, and that's because they put up pretty similar performance numbers, even though the Mercedes showed that it has a little bit more grip. And I would say that both vehicles were very impressive on our test track. The BMW was a bit more fun to drive, but then this AMG GT, no slouch of its own. Even though it's, again, a bit more clinical, that doesn't mean that it's not fun at all. It's still very, very quick, but the BMW is just an absolute riot on wheels. The Mercedes interior, we gave the advantage to based on its more modern design and better materials. And we'd also say that for the exterior styling, your mileage may vary. There is, however, one very big catch that we haven't discussed yet in this video, and that is price. And that's because while both of these vehicles do come with about $30,000 worth of options all on their own, the final price is not even close. As it sits, this AMG GT costs just over $206,000, and that is, any way you slice it, a really big price for it to live up to. However, if we move over to the BMW, it costs right around $158,000, nearly $50,000 less than the Mercedes. And with a price gap like that, it becomes very hard to recommend the Mercedes over the BMW. I guess there's a case to be made that if you want the absolute newest car with the most sporting potential, you can still go this way. But as it sits, that M8 is kind of like, and I can't believe I'm saying this, an $160,000 bargain of sorts. Now, there are hotter versions of the Mercedes-Benz coming. There are AMG GT Pro and hybrid versions coming that are going to be even faster than this car here, and we can't wait to get our hands on those. But for this comparison today, even though there are no real losers, there's one clear winner.